Welcome to the Spellguard Arcanist tank build, the ultimate choice for aspiring Arcanist tanks seeking to conquer all Elder Scrolls Online content, be it solo or group endeavours. With this build, you'll seamlessly triumph over various challenges, solo overland quests, delves, world bosses and events will bow before your might. Even daunting solo arenas like Maelstrom Arena and Vateshran Hollows can be conquered with ease, potentially even on veteran difficulty. No longer will group content like normal dungeons be a burden, as you can effortlessly tackle them solo or with a 4-person group. Undertaking daily pledges on veteran hard mode without a hiccup is now well within your reach. Moreover, normal trials and group arenas pose no obstacle. This build is capable of it all, but should you aspire to conquer veteran arenas, veteran DLC dungeons and veteran trials, some modifications to your build may be necessary. So let's embark on this exciting journey. So what prompted the creation of this build? Well, if you've experienced my Accolade Dragon Knight tank build, you'll find that the Arcanist version elevates the experience to new heights. As an Arcanist tank, you won't have to endure the frustration of underperforming DPS in your group content. In fact, you'll make a significant contribution to the group's damage output while still fulfilling your tank role and providing valuable group buffs. When tackling solo content, the security of a tank build may be appealing. With this build, you'll be empowered to conquer previously inaccessible challenges. Veteran Vateshran Hollows, for instance, becomes an attainable goal. You'll breeze through group arenas and dungeons and be effortlessly able to solo 4-person encounters. So what does this build bring to the table? Here's a glimpse. You'll have impressive in-content DPS of well over 25k DPS. You'll have the ability to effectively tank while dealing substantial damage without making too many sacrifices. You'll offer multiple group buffs provided by carefully chosen gear sets. You'll utilise commonly sought after meta tank gear that you may already possess. The skill selection offers versatile functionality. You have exceptional crowd control capabilities including snares, immobilizations and pulls. You'll have comfortable completion of all ESO content with minor adjustments required for that harder vet trials, arenas and DLC dungeons. With this build, you're able to unleash huge potential of an Arcanist tank, dominating every challenge that comes your way in the Elder Scrolls Online. So to kickstart the Spellguard Arcanist tank build, we're going to look at the race. And on this occasion, I've gone with a Khajiit, and the reason for this is because it has the ability to hybridize between damage and tanking. So if we look at the passives that are obtainable here, we've got health, magicka and stamina recovery. We've got max stats with max health, magicka and stamina. And then we've also got the extra crit damage and crit healing. So by using a Khajiit, we're able to combine both aspects of tanking and aspects of damage dealing. The race is quite open, so you could go with Nord if you want to be more tank focused. You could choose anything you want instead, but a Khajiit is going to allow you to go between that damage and tank space. Now we take a look at our attributes and our stats. As you can see, we've got quite a lot of max stats, 21k magicka, 32k health and 30k stamina. That's with 64 points into stamina. We've got a lot of recovery as well, over 1,000 of every recovery, and we've nearly got 5k weapon damage along with 34% crit. Our resistances are on the lower side, but with the content we're trying to do, they are going to be more than fine. If you did want to get onto the harder content, you will have to make some slight adjustments to make use out of that. If we also look at more of our core abilities, our block cost 963, our block mitigation 73%. Those are all very important stats that we need to consider as well when we're going into tanking content. For our consumables, we have Bewitched Sugar Skulls food. You could use other food as well that will give you max health, stamina, and maybe stamina recovery. You could also use max health with magical recovery. There's a range of different foods you can use. This one is giving me all my max stats, which I'm finding really useful for this build. I didn't find it essential to use other food when I was set up correctly with the way that I wanted to. So this was what I was going with. On the potions, you want to use any kind of tri-stat potion that you can. I've got these crown tri-stat potions because I collect my daily rewards every day. You can use the crafted ones as well. They're exactly the same, so don't feel a need to specifically purchase these off the store. These are just from the daily rewards. Make use of them. Use the crafted ones as well. But tri-stat potions is going to give you all 3 stats back, all 3 recoveries, and that's really useful when we're playing this build. With Mundus Stone, I found the Thief to provide us with the most benefit. As you can see on the sheet there, we've got increased weapon and spell critical strike rating by 2093. If you're going into very high intense environments where you're going to need a lot of enemy pulling and magica abilities, obviously you could switch this out to the Vateshran arc. Otherwise, when you are focusing on distributing some DPS as well, the Thief is going to give you the most benefit. One of the interesting parts of this build is it's a hybridized tank damage dealer build. You are able to perform very, very strongly as a tank in the content that it's designed to do. With the gear that we're going to be using, these are all gear sets that you will need for tanking, whether it's for this build or for your meta endgame veteran trial builds. We're using gear that is essential for all content no matter what. So even though this is a kind of off-meta build, the gear we're using is meta tank gear. So our first gear set, I'm using the Perfected Pearlescent Ward gear set. And this one is a really, really good set. So we are going to get increased max health. We're going to get minor Aegis, reducing the damage we take by 5%. Increased healing taken. I'm using Perfected because I want to get the additional 1206 max health. If you can't get the Perfected, that is absolutely fine. Just use the normal version. And then finally, we get the 5-piece bonus, which grants you up to 11 group members Pearlescent Ward. This is going to increase weapon and spell damage by 180 based on the number of group members that are alive. This is a group buff set. This is a set that you need for all tank content in the Elder Scrolls Online, and it's fantastic because you don't have to do anything to provide this buff. So you're just going to give your group 180 weapon and spell damage. You're also going to benefit from that as well. If people in your group then die, you will get damage reduction. So Pearlescent Ward increases damage reduction from non-player enemies out of 66% based on the number of group members that are dead. So if somebody dies, you're going to get damage reduction. So you become more and more tanky with the more amount of people in your group that might potentially die. So it's a really good set for buffing your group in terms of damage, and it's a really good group benefit in terms of safety as well if your group members do die. For the Pearlescent Ward set, I am using it on the sword, the shield, I'm using it on the chest, the neck, and one of the rings as well. The second set I'm using is Powerful Assault. This can be picked up in the Imperial Sewers. You could also purchase it off the guild stores. It's a very accessible tank set, and the pieces that you're going to be using on this build are also going to be the cheap pieces that are very easy and very low cost to pick up. Now, because we are going for a damage-based tank, we are using Powerful Assault on the body, and that is because it is a medium armor set. So we use the helmet of Powerful Assault, the waist, the hands, the legs, and the feet as well. The reason we use Powerful Assault is because this is going to increase our maximum health again. It's going to increase our max stamina. We're going to get additional weapon and spell damage. And when you cast an assault ability while in combat, you and up to 5 group members within 12 meters gain 307 weapon and spell damage for 15 seconds. So this is another group buff set. It's another really strong set. It's a set that you need for endgame content. It's a set that you need for this build. It's going to buff you and it's going to buff your group. So we're getting great group benefits here because we're providing our self benefits with that increased weapon and spell damage, but we're also giving it to our group. When we looked at the character sheet before, that did not include the bonus from Powerful Assault to our weapon and spell damage. The next piece I'm using is Krog's. The reason I'm using this is for the additional offensive pen. If you wanted to, you could use a one piece that gives increased recovery or some other benefit. Maybe you need more health, so use a piece of gear that gives you extra max health. Maybe you need more magica recovery, use a gear set that gives you increased magica recovery. I went with the offensive pen because I'm quite a way off the pen cap. while playing as a tank in a solo situation, so I wanted to provide additional pen so that I can do more damage in solo situations. So I've gone with a one piece of Krags. The final piece of gear is a mythic item. It is the Oaken Soul Ring, and the reason we use this is because we're able to obtain a lot of additional benefits without the need for filling up our bar with different abilities that are going to make it more difficult to do damage. So the reason we use this is because it gives us damage benefits, sustain benefits, and tank benefits all combined into one, which makes us able to play this build very easily and dish out as much damage as possible. By using this ring, we can only use one bar, but it does give us the option for great damage. We're going to get minor berserk, minor courage, major brutality, major sorcery, major prophecy, major savagery, minor force, minor protection, major resolve, minor mending, minor fortitude, minor intellect, minor endurance, minor heroism, minor slayer, minor aegis, and empower. The list is absolutely huge, and this is what allows us, we're able to tank because of the minor protection, the major resolve and things like that. We've got the minor mending in there. These are real strong tank benefits. By having that berserk and brutality, the prophecy, all those kinds of things that are going to buff our damage, it also means we don't need to use potions such as spell power potions or weapon potions because we don't need those benefits. We've got them tied in with our gear set. We also get the additional benefit of quicker ulti-gen with minor heroism. We're able to do more damage with heavy attacks from Empower, so when you need to gain resources back, if you're running low on stamina, you do a heavy attack. Your heavy attack is going to hit for 30k because we've got that Empower in there as well. So everything we do is going to be buffed up thanks to this one absolutely fantastic piece of gear. In terms of the gear weights, I've gone with 511. The light piece can be on the head or the shoulder. They're all the same when you're working out between light and medium. I've gone with heavy on the chest to give me the most absolute maximum value of armor to give me that extra tankiness, and then the rest of the gear is the medium. For the traits and enchants, I've gone with sharpened on the one-hander. You could go with infused, you could use something different, use whatever you need for your own self, but I've found that this is the most benefit in terms of the damage. I've gone with Crusher on there, even though it's a much weaker Crusher than if we were using it on an ice staff like you would on a conventional tank build. It's better than not having it at all. You could also opt for something such as Charged Poison so that you get access to a bit more minor breach. It's up to you which way you want to do it. I've gone with this Sharpened Crusher. On the shield, we've got Divines. We've gone with all Divines on the gear, and that's because we don't need things like Sturdy. We're not trying to be too tanky because the content that you're intending to do on this doesn't include Vet Trials, doesn't include Veteran DLC dungeons, so you do not need to be at the resistance cap to perform with this build. So Divines is going to increase our damage. If we switch our Mundus Stone over to something else like the Atronach, we're going to get more Magicka recovery, so we can play as a tank more effectively. By using the medium armor, we get the medium armor bonuses of 3% reduced cost of block per piece. Now, because we are using 5 pieces of medium, we get quite a big block cost reduction already. So using something like Sturdy would not be helpful in that situation. For our enchants, you would get more damage if we stacked up the max stamina, and we just went with stamina enchants on our gear. The problem with that is then you don't have enough max health. You might also not have enough max magicka. So to balance things out, to make sure we can tank most effectively and still distribute damage, the tri-stat enchants are essential. You're going to get 2,000 overall more stats compared to going with one single stat, but obviously you have a little bit less stamina. You've sacrificed a bit of stamina and a little bit of damage to get more max health and more magicka. And because we've already put all of our attributes into stamina, we need to try and balance that health and magicka up a little bit more. For the jewelry, I have gone with 3 infused, and with those I'm also using weapon and spell damage enchants. We also get a little bit of extra stamina recovery on there, which is going to be really useful because we are going to be using a couple of stamina skills with this build. The intention is that you're not supposed to block all the time with this build, so the stamina recovery is helpful. If you were going into slightly harder content, you could just switch the enchant to be magicka recovery, or you could use tri-cost reduction as well as another option. Now we're going to take a look at the skills, and with all of the skills and abilities that we're using, we're trying to find functionality of the skills where they can do a range of different things. If you've got a skill that just does one thing, it's not very useful. Luckily with the Arcanist, they have some of the absolute best passives in the game out of all of the classes. Very, very strong, which makes this build much, much easier to use. And there's so many skills as well that the Arcanist has access to, which have that additional functionality. So the Arcanist is very versatile, which makes them really strong at performing this hybridized tank and damage dealer role. So our first skill is Runic Sunder. We need to have a taunt on this build, and I did have to weigh up the options of using Runic Sunder or Pierce Armor or Frost Clench, and I did go with Runic Sunder. And the reason for this is because I needed something to build up Crux to help me do more damage. It's also a taunt, it's also applying minor maim to the enemy, so reducing their damage. So we're getting a range of different things. It's a good thing as well that it also does damage, and it's a range taunt. So we've got lots and lots of things built in here for the low cost of 1,239 stamina. So a very good skill for this build, and it's a really good way to build up Crux very quickly as well. The next skill we're using is Razor Caltrops. We have to use a skill to proc Powerful Assault. And this is the best option because we're going to get, again, multiple functionality. Because we're using Runic Sunder, we don't have access to Major Breach. So we do have access to Major Breach via Razor Caltrops. And then it's good because we also don't have overlapping effects. So we have Major Breach applied as an area of an effect. We also do AoE damage, which is really useful as well. And we also apply a snare to the enemy. So we're going to throw this down on the ground, and we're going to use it for our point where we're going to try and stack our enemies. We're going to keep everything inside of it so that they're taking more damage, and it's also going to do damage over time as well, so it's a really strong skill for this build. The next skill is Pragmatic Fate Carver. This skill is essentially free thanks to the cost of it is going to be 345 stamina every 0.3 seconds. When you're using this, you're not going to be blocking. So what is going to happen is during the time that you're using it, you're going to be gaining stamina recovery because you're not blocking. If you block, your stamina recovery gets turned off, but when you use this skill, you can't physically be blocking because it's a channeled skill. So what this does, it's going to channel a beam for 4 seconds. It's going to deal 3,833 magic damage every 0.3 seconds. The strong points of this, while channeling, you also gain a damage shield that absorbs 13,640 damage and grants interrupt immunity. So you're not going to be able to be interrupted, you can just channel away, you're going to have a damage shield, you're going to be doing lots of damage. It's AoE damage as well, and casting Prismatic Fate Carver consumes all Crux and increases damage done by 33%, decreases cost by 16% per Crux spent. So we're going to try to build up our Crux and then use this skill. So we're going to be using Runic Sunder, that's going to give us a Crux. Our next skill gives us Crux as well. We'll then use Runic Sunder again to get our third Crux, and then we just use this skill to dish out a ton of extra damage. And the fact that it does AoE damage as well makes it really important for this build. Because it's free, it makes it really important for this build. This build is even easier than the Dragon Knight Accolade build, because with that build, when you use the Unrelenting Grip, which was a really high damage skill that we were using, that was only free on bosses or enemies that have been pulled already. Once you'd kind of use that, it then had a really high cost. With this skill, it is essentially free at all times, like a very small cost, but when you use it, you're not even going to notice because you're not going to be blocking, you're going to be getting that stam recovery. It's going to be absolutely fantastic for this build. The next skill we've got is, this is going to be your heal. I've tested out a couple of different heal skills. They didn't quite match the usefulness that I needed, but this one is very strong. You're going to infuse your arm with abyssal magic to form tentacles that lash out at your foes, dealing 8,021 physical damage. It's going to heal yourself for 3,906 and generate Crux. Enemies are going to be immobilized for 3 seconds and marked with abyssal ink. So the reason I'm using this skill is because I need a heal that also does something else. If I just kind of use a skill that just heals me, it's a bit of a waste of a skill slot. The fact that this will generate a Crux, it immobilizes enemies, so it gives us that tank functionality where we're crowd controlling enemies. We can do that. We get a huge amount of damage. We apply Abyssal Ink, which is going to increase the amount of damage that enemies take. And it does more damage to enemies that are on low health. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply this to a boss so that they take that increased damage. It's going to give us the Crux that we need, and then we're going to hit them with the Pragmatic Fate Carver. In an ad pull, we're going to use this for a different reason. We're going to use this after we've pulled enemies onto our Caltrops. We're then going to use this to root them in place on top of our Caltrops. So a very useful skill once again, because it's crowd control and damage and the heal all combined into one skill. Next we've got Rune of Uncanny Adoration. Again, another multifunctioning skill. We need a reason and a way to pull enemies in, and we also need to make use of a bit of magic here, because so far most of the skills are stamina based skills. and that's because our stamina bar is larger than our magicka bar. And again, this skill is going to provide us with multi-functionality. So we're going to apply this to the enemy. They're going to be applied with minor vulnerability, which increases the damage they receive by 5%. This is the way that we pull enemies in. If you haven't seen how this works yet, you apply this to an enemy that is at range. They then get charmed, which means they then run to you and they follow you around for 8 seconds. Not only that, but for that 8 seconds while they are following you, they will not do any damage. So it's extremely good because it's not just a pull skill, it removes all the damage that they do. It prevents enemies from doing any damage at all. So once again, another really useful skill. You need to be able to pull enemies in as a tank, but the fact that it applies that minor vulnerability is going to increase your DPS and your group's DPS, and it's a way to stack enemies. It's the way to stop anyone doing damage to you. So very, very useful. And then finally, we have got our ultimate. I've gone with this one because it's a nice ultimate for the Arcanist. There are other options on your ultimate if you wanted to, but this one for me was the better option because it just provides some nice damage. It's AoE damage. It's going to follow the enemy around. So when the enemy's moving about, it's going to stick to them, and then it's going to move to a new target if that one dies. So it's really, really good because it does provide a lot of damage. The fact that it tracks an enemy and keeps doing it and then moves in that area is very strong. But if you wanted to use something else, you could use something like Dawnbreaker. You could use Meteor from the Mages Guild, and the Gibbering Shield is also something you could consider, which is going to be decent. It doesn't actually output and lash out as much damage as you might think. I have tested this out a number of times. The outgoing damage that it does isn't amazing, but it's something else that you could use. In terms of your passives, you need to have all of your Herald of the Tome passives. These are going to increase a lot of your damage, so when you generate or consume crooks, increases your crit damage and crit healing. Very useful. When you restore magicka or stamina, you increases your weapon and spell damage. Again, extremely useful. We need more damage. Your attacks wound the mind with hysterical knowledge, increasing damage dealt by status effects by 15% and status effect chance by 75%. Increases your physical and spell penetration by 991 per ability. So we're going to get an additional 2,937 pen, which is going to help us reach that pen cap, which is extremely good. The Soldier of Apocrypha. You need all of these as well because these are going to give us some really good benefits as well. We're going to get increased resistances by 1980. We've got increased recovery by 258. Minor evasion for ourselves and our group, so we'll get a bit of damage reduction there. When you consume crooks, you gain 4 ultimates, so we're going to get our ultimate back faster, and we are consuming crooks quite often. On the Curative Rune Form, again, we've got some useful ones here. So increase your healing done by 3% for each active crooks. So we're potentially always going to be healing when we've got 2 crooks. So if you've taunted with Runic Sunder, then you've used this skill here. That's going to do an additional stack of crooks. It's also your heal. You've got this to buff your healing, so that's really good. When you generate crooks, you restore magicka or stamina, whichever max is higher. So again, we're going to be doing that quite frequently. So we're going to get increased restore on our resources. This one's the massive one. So increased magicka and stamina recovery by 18%. This is what makes it so easy to play a build like this because of passives like this. The final passive isn't really useful because we are not slotting any skills from the Curative Rune Form skill line, so we're not going to get the benefit of that, and we're not using many damage shields anyway. For all your other passives, obviously, we're using a one-handed shield, so take all of those. Some of these are going to increase damage and reduce cost of block and things like that, so these are all really useful. For armor, we are using 511, so you want to take everything in all of your different armor. You're going to want to take the Undaunted passives as well, because we're going to get that increase of 6% more stats thanks to the 511 setup, and obviously we want that increased resource gain from synergies. And then obviously you may need to make sure you've got all your passives for your race. Next, we're going to move on to the champion points, and these can be changed and customized to suit your specific needs depending on the situation that you're in. So for your blue champion points, it is going to be essential to go into this category here and take all of the defensive passives to get the damage reduction. We're not using a conventional tank setup, but you need to make sure you've got all of these kind of passives that can be used without being slotted. You really want to make sure you've got Piercing in there for that increased offensive pen, as well as Battle Mastery, Mighty, and those kinds of things. In terms of your slottable CP, because we were limited to the one heal that we've got, and it might be a little bit tricky sometimes, you want to use Reaving Blows so that when you deal direct damage, you heal for 8% of the damage done. This appears to work very, very well and will help you get through a lot of the content, especially so you don't have to spend huge amounts of resources using your heal skill. I've also got Weapons Expert, increases your damage done with light and heavy attacks by 20%. So really strong again, because we have got Empower from heavy attacks, increased damage done from heavy attacks here as well. So when you are running low on resources, you can decide to switch up to a heavy attack rotation. So you'll heavy attack in between your skills. That's going to give you huge amounts of damage. When you light attack in between skills, when you've got plenty of resources, that's going to give you a nice increase as well. So a really good one to use for this build. If you wanted to switch this one out though, if you wanted to go with something a bit more defensive, this is the one I would change personally. And then you can switch it up for something like Unassailable, Enduring Resolve, Duelist Rebuff, Ironclad, or Bulwark, depending on what things you need. And then up in this corner here, we've also got Biting Aura, which is going to give us 6% more AoE damage. This is linked with the main skill that we're going to be using for our damage. And then so is Thaumaturge, which increases damage over time by 6% damage. So these are both essential for our main DPS damage skill. On the red CP, it's another one of the same kind of story. We've got to take all of these passives that give us benefits without needing to be slotted. These are going to be really helpful, including max health increase. We've also got some important ones, reducing the cost of block, increased amount of damage that you can block over here. So those are all very useful as well. In terms of slottable CP, increased max health and increased resistances, increased armor. They're going to be extremely useful because we are tanky. So these are more tanky champion point passives compared to the blue CP. It can be useful to use Bloody Renewal to restore 1,500 stamina per enemy that you kill. Obviously for dungeon content, when you do have other group members, it might not work as good, but it definitely works well for those solo situations where you are just playing solo. In group content, you might want to switch this for something different, but I think it works pretty well as it is. And then to reiterate the tankiness, we're going with Brace and Anchor. So when you do receive heavy attacks, when you are taking big damage, you can block, and you've got 20% increased block mitigation, which is extremely useful for staying alive. We're now going to go over the quick rotation for this build in terms of the ad fights and then boss fights, because they will vary between the two things in how you play this build. So for this build, we've got two different rotations, one for ad pulls and one for boss fights. You've got to remember, for ad pulls, your primary thing to do is to make sure you've got enemies crowd controlled and pulled into a stack so that they can be AoE down. And on boss fights, you need to be single target focused on high pressure and damage. So in this situation, we've got a range of enemies stacked around the area. As you go into combat in this situation, you would throw down a Caltrops in front of the enemy. So not on top of them, you throw it in front of them so that they walk into it, they then get snared, and then they kind of stick around the area. You've also then got a place where you need to target, pull in everything to that space. So you'll throw down your Caltrops in front of the enemy. As you walk in, you use Rune of the Uncanny Adoration on the ranged enemies to bring them into the stack. And then once everything is pulled in, you use Abyssal Impact to immobilize them. Once that then happens, you then just use your beam to kill everything and get rid of it. And it's that simple. Once your Caltrops expires, throw it down over the group again. If there's still any ranged enemies, just continue to bring those in, and then you just go through and beam them all to death. When it comes to a boss fight, you've got a different focus. So we've got to build up our crux so we do more damage, and we want to make sure we're maintaining all of our debuffs on the enemy as well. So with a boss, you'll always go in with a taunt as your primary thing. You'll then proc your Powerful Assault by throwing down a Caltrops. You then want to use your Abyssal Impact to get that second crux, Rune of the Uncanny Adoration to apply minor vulnerability, Runic Sunder again for your third crux, and then your beam. And because everything is active on the boss at that time, you're then able to maintain good amounts of damage. Once your skills expire, you just refresh them and just make sure you keep that same rotation of skills going. As soon as your ultimate returns, you wait until you've applied all of the things again, so you want to make sure everything is active, then you drop your ultimate, and then you can use your beam through the enemy as well to do lots and lots of damage. By doing this, you are going to get a really good amount of damage, especially as a tank, and especially as you kind of speed this up into those fights, you're going to get a lot of damage. And that is the basic rotation for boss fights. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our patrons for keeping the channel alive with their support. If you would like to see more information on this build, you can check out the website over at thetankclub.com. The link is in the description below. This was the Spellguard Arcanist tank build for all content. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye for now.